A boy stands in a dusty courtyard in Bida, and an old man tells him a sentence that sounds like a blessing, until it turns into a threat. In this town, power's not inherited, it is survived. Decades later, that boy will be called Aliyu Makama Bida, a name that sounds like a title, like a drumbeat. Yet his first lesson about leadership won't be glory, it will be fear. Because in northern Nigeria in the early 1900s, the most dangerous thing you can do is look like someone the future might choose. He is born in 1905, in Bida, the heartland of the Nupe Emirate, a place where authority is visible everywhere, in the way elders sit, not in the way messengers run, in the way silence falls when a horseman passes. The town wakes to the metallic call of blacksmiths and the soft thunder of hooves. It sleeps under stories, some of them heroic, some of them warnings. The British are already present, but not always visible. They don't need to be. Their power arrives through stamped paper, through residents, through decisions made far away and carried into local palaces like sealed fates. Aliyu grows up watching that strange double world, the ancient rhythms of emirate life, and the new, colder logic of colonial administration. In one world, legitimacy comes from lineage, custom, and consensus. In the other, it comes from a signature in English. And even as a child, he senses the poisonous truth. When two systems overlap, the ambitious can climb faster, but they can also fall harder. His family is connected to the traditional aristocracy of Bida. The very sound of Makama is not casual. It signals rank, proximity to power, and expectation. But expectation is a blade with two edges. In a royal court, your name can open doors and paint a target on your back. Aliyu is taught early to watch faces the way other boys watch birds. He learns to interpret pauses, to hear what is not said, a servant who suddenly avoids eye contact, a counselor who laughs too loudly, an uncle who travels and returns quieter. In Bida, politics is not announced. It is inhaled like smoke. His education begins where many northern elites begin, in Quranic schooling, where discipline is strict and memory is a currency. The day's verses are recited, repeated, and carried like stones inside the mind. Aliyu's voice, still young, learns steadiness. He becomes known not as the loud child, but as the one who listens, then answers cleanly. That trait, measured, controlled, almost unsettling, will follow him. But the 1910s and 1920s bring a new kind of schooling into the Emirates, and it divides families. Some elders distrust it as a foreign trap. Learn the colonizer's language, and soon you will think like him. Others see the opposite. Refuse the new system, and you will become irrelevant inside your own country. Aliyu's household is pulled into that tension, and he, the boy with the dangerous name, realizes another rule. Sometimes survival means learning the enemy's tools without letting them own your soul. So he steps into the world of modern administration, carefully. English is not just a language. It is a key that can unlock budgets, appointments, influence. The first time he sees an official letter, typed, crisp, authoritative, he understands the new hierarchy is made of paper. Not swords, not horses, paper. He enters public service at a time when northern Nigeria is being reorganized, cataloged, and governed through indirect rule. Emirs still reign, but under supervision. Courts still operate, but within limits. The colonial machine prefers stability above justice, predictability above truth. It needs men who can translate two worlds. Men who can speak to the palace without insulting it, and speak to the British without challenging them. Aliyu's temperament fits, poised, patient, observant. Yet his early career is not a smooth ascent. It is a tightrope. The slightest misstep, too independent for the British, too cooperative for the traditionalists, and he could be crushed between loyalties. There is a moment, told later in Bida, as if it were a parable. A young Aliyu is asked by a superior to deliver a message that would embarrass a local notable. He reads it, pauses, and says he will deliver it exactly as written. Then he folds it, walks out, and returns an hour later with the same message, delivered, but with the humiliation diffused by a single change in tone, a single respectful phrase added in Hausa before the English text is presented. He doesn't alter the command. He alters the temperature. That is his skill. He cools fires before others even smell smoke. But skills create rivals. Every court has them. Men who smile in the daytime and sharpen knives at night. In Aliyu's orbit, one figure begins to loom. Another ambitious administrator from a respected line, another man fluent in the grammar of power, another candidate for the same future. Let's call him what people in Bida would call him in whispers, the competitor. A man who understands one crucial thing about colonial-era advancement. The British do not reward the most beloved. They reward the most manageable. And the competitor sets out to look like the easiest choice. At first it is subtle. Aliyu is praised for competence. And then, in the next breath, someone remarks that he is too close to the palace. or too traditional, or too careful. Meanwhile, the competitor is described as modern, efficient, forward-looking, words that sound like compliments. But in that period, they are also a code for safe. Aliyu responds with the only weapon that never rusts: discipline. He becomes meticulous. Documents are filed, accounts are balanced. Meetings are attended on time. He learns that in an environment where gossip can kill careers, accuracy is armor. Then the pressure rises. Because as Nigeria moves toward the mid-century, the air changes. The idea of self-rule begins to spread from the coast into the north. New political organizations appear, and the old system, palace-centered, tradition-centered, feels the tremor of something coming. Aliyu, still relatively young, is now standing at the edge of a new arena. Administration is no longer just about obeying the colonial chain. It is about anticipating the future state, and that is where the competitor becomes truly dangerous. The competitor chooses a strategy: attach himself to the rising currents, present himself as the inevitable man of tomorrow, and quietly frame Aliyu as yesterday. It is a clever move because it forces Aliyu into a dilemma. If he also rushes into politics, he risks looking opportunistic or disloyal to the emirate. If he stays purely administrative, he risks being overtaken by the new political class. Aliyu's life begins to acquire a countdown, not yet visible but real, because by the late 1940s and early 1950s, one truth hardens across northern Nigeria. When independence comes, the people who will shape the new country are not just the loud nationalists in Lagos. They are also the northern elite who can deliver unity, stability, and votes. The window for positioning is closing. If Aliyu waits too long, he will become a footnote. If he moves too early, he could become a casualty. So he moves carefully but decisively. He starts building relationships beyond Bida, beyond Noop circles, into the wider northern political network forming in the period. He listens more than he speaks, collecting information like a man collecting water before drought. He attends gatherings where politics is discussed indirectly, through talk of roads, schools, local councils. He becomes one of those men who can sit with traditional rulers and modern organizers without seeming out of place in either room. And still, the competitor pushes. A rumor surfaces, small, poisonous, that Aliyu is too ambitious. In a palace environment, ambition is never neutral. It is either a promise or a threat. The rumor travels the way rumors do. No single source, but suddenly everyone has heard it. Aliyu recognizes the hand behind it. He also recognizes the trap. Deny it too loudly and you confirm it. Ignore it and it grows. He chooses the third option, outperform it. He takes on tasks others avoid. He mediates disputes without making enemies. He helps ensure that local governance looks stable to the British, while quietly strengthening northern capacity for eventual self-administration. His name begins to circulate not as a firebrand, but as something perhaps more valuable. A man who can hold the center when everyone else pulls it apart. Here's the twist. The very quality that makes him seem old-fashioned, his rootedness in traditional authority, also makes him uniquely useful in the coming storm. Because northern Nigeria is not going to be led by men who burn down the past. It will be led by men who can repack the past into a future the people will accept. And Aliyu understands that by the 1950s, politics is no longer a distant thunder. It is overhead. Negotiations over constitutional development, regional power, and federal arrangements are reshaping identities. The North is organizing to protect its interests in the coming federation. And within that movement, men are being selected quietly for bigger roles. Aliyu sees the competitor again, now more confident, now positioned as the modern choice. The competitor has patrons who love his certainty. Aliyu has something else: endurance, patience, the ability to survive a room full of sharks without bleeding. But endurance has a cost. The more Aliyu rises, the more limited his time becomes. In this phase of his life, there is an unspoken deadline. The next political cycle, the next appointment, the next reshuffle. Each one could lock him out permanently. He cannot afford one scandal, one miscalculation, one public misstep. His life becomes a series of controlled moments, and then comes a moment that changes his trajectory. A conversation, late at night, after a long day of official duties, where an elder tells him with unusual bluntness that the country being born will devour men who are not prepared to fight for relevance. Not with fists, with alliances, with strategy, with timing. Aliyu goes home that night and does not sleep. Not because he's afraid of failure, he has lived with fear since childhood, but because he realizes something sharper. He has been trained to be a perfect servant of systems. Now he must learn to be an architect of one. And the competitor, already building his own ladder, will not step aside politely. So Aliyu begins to prepare for the next act of his life. The act where public service turns into public power. He begins to make choices that cannot be undone. He is still the disciplined boy from Bida, still hearing the old warning, power is survived. But now he adds his own answer. Power is also planned. And as the political temperature of Nigeria climbs toward independence, Aliyu Makama Bida stands at a threshold where one wrong step will erase him, and one bold, perfectly timed move could make him impossible to ignore. Part 1 ends here. The move that will change his life does not arrive with a trumpet. It arrives as a deadline, a piece of information whispered in a hot, airless room in Kaduna. There will be elections for a new regional government, sooner than anyone expected. Men who have only ever carried out orders will now compete to give them. The North must organize, choose leaders, form a party that can stand against the Southern blocs, and it must do it fast. Months, not years. If they miscalculate, the North will walk into independence as a giant with tied hands. In that room, someone asks a quiet question that cuts through the noise. Who will speak for us? Several names are mentioned, some loudly, some cautiously, but one name comes with a pause, as if everyone is measuring it in the air. Aliyu Makama Bida. The irony is brutal. This is exactly the kind of moment the competitor has been waiting for. The competitor is already in Kaduna, already circulating, already dropping suggestions into conversations like seeds. That he understands modern politics, that he has read the reports from Lagos, that he knows how Southern parties operate. He wears his Western suit a little more tightly, his English a little more brightly. He tells anyone who will listen that the old way of choosing leaders, through palace influence and quiet patronage, is over. Now is the age of the rally, the manifesto, the handshake in front of cameras. He never says Aliyu's name when he dismisses old ways. He doesn't have to. Everyone knows who he means. Aliyu arrives in Kaduna days later, traveling from Bida under a sun that burns all colors down to the same exhausted dust. On the train, he watches the flat, endless land pass by and feels the weight of two clocks. The public one, counting down to elections, and in the private one, counting down to his own final chance. He is in his late 40s now, in a country where a new, young, educated elite is appearing from colleges in Ibadan and mission schools in the south. A man approaching 50 cannot afford to be almost. The first time he sits in a meeting of what will become the Northern People's Congress, the air is thick with fear, disguised as strategy. Traditional rulers worry about losing authority. Western-educated Northerners worry about being outpaced by Southern lawyers and journalists. British officials, sitting a little apart, worry mostly about stability, that thing they talk about as if it were a moral value rather than a preference. The competitor speaks early, quickly, confidently. He talks of campaign structures, of electoral math, of working with the British timetable instead of against it. He sprinkles his Hausa with sharp English terms, registration, legislation, coalition, and each word is like a flare. See, I understand this new game. When he finishes, there is polite tapping of fingers on the floor. The conservative northern man's applause. Then, reluctantly, someone asks Aliyu to speak. He does not stand up immediately. That is the first thing people notice. He looks around the room, letting the silence stretch until it starts to feel like a mirror. When he finally rises, he doesn't begin with strategy. He begins with a picture. In some villages in our region, he says slowly, a man can walk from dawn until the call to evening prayer and not see one school built by government. Not one. He lets that hang. Yet in a few years, we are told, there will be a country, a federation, a parliament where laws are read in English, numbers are argued with confidence, and those who cannot follow will simply nod. He does not raise his voice, but he sharpens it. So ask yourselves, when that parliament sits, will the North send men who think politics is a game of who can shout the newest word in English, or will we send men who know what keeps our people awake at night? The room tilts. It is not a rejection of modern politics. It is a reminder of the North's deepest vulnerability, being left behind in a country that moves ahead. In that moment, some of the older emirs in attendance look at Aliyu and see something they had quietly feared they would never see. Again, a man who understands their world and the strange one approaching it. The competitor smiles tightly. He recognizes the danger. This is not a clash between modern and traditional anymore. This is a clash between two interpretations of the future. The rush begins. Candidates must be selected for the coming elections to the regional house. The British have given dates and rules and limits, and inside those limits, the NPC must move like men trying to build a house during a sandstorm. Time is not an ally. It is a threat. Each month that passes without discipline is a month given to Southern parties who have been organizing longer, louder, and with less hesitation. Aliyu is asked to stand as a candidate. On paper, he is strong, experienced in administration, respected by the palace in Bida, known to British officials as reliable and known to Northern traditionalists as loyal. But paper does not vote, people do. And the people are suspicious. They have seen government mostly as a distant force that collects taxes and sends policemen. Now they are told to trust it. He travels. Dust on his shoes, sweat in his collar. He moves from Bida to smaller towns, from market squares to mosques, from early morning gatherings to late-night consultations under lantern light. He has no loudspeakers, no glossy posters. Many of his listeners cannot read anyway. So he uses stories. He talks about the boy who walks 4 miles to find a teacher who can write his name, the farmer who cannot argue a bad price because the contract is in a language he does not speak, the village that loses a court case because no one there understands how to speak to a judge in terms he respects. Ththese things, Aliyu tells them, are politics, not shouting in Lagos, not speeches on the radio. He points at the cracked earth, the tired faces. If we leave other people to decide for us how Nigeria will be arranged, this is what will pay the price. Your land, your sons, your future. The competitor campaigns differently. He chooses a constituency where the towns are larger, where the new schools cluster, where the young men wear ties and debate newspapers. He organizes crisp rallies. He uses the new vocabulary of nationalism like a musician uses rhythm, representation, development, federal balance. He reminds people that he has friends in Lagos, contacts among southern politicians, the trust of certain British officials. He implies that Aliyu is tied to the past, to palaces that are afraid of losing influence. The race is uneven. It is not simply about popularity. It is about which vision of the North will define the party's first steps. Election night is not a night at all. It is a long, cold stretch of hours, lit by weak lamps and strong tempers. Results arrive slowly, carried by messengers whose faces give away the numbers before their words do. In the competitor's constituency, the verdict is clear. He wins with comfort. His supporters celebrate as if it were a coronation. In Aliyu's, the count is narrow. At one point, a rumor slides through the crowd that he has lost by a handful of votes. Someone in the corner smiles too quickly. The old warning about power being survived, not inherited, echoes in his ears like a taunt. Then in the small hours, the final tally. Aliyu wins, barely, by a margin so small that it could have been erased by one village choosing to stay home. He does not celebrate. He sits alone for a few minutes, breathing steadily, understanding the message hidden inside the victory. You are not inevitable. You are not safe. You are here by inches. In Kaduna, when the new Northern House of Assembly meets for the first time, the pressure intensifies. The North must choose a premier, a government, a strategy for approaching the coming constitutional talks with the rest of Nigeria. The British resident watches from a balcony, like a man supervising a delicate surgery he does not fully trust. Ahmadu Bello emerges as leader, a figure who can carry both the turban of traditional authority and the language of modern governance. Around him, a circle begins to form. The competitor maneuvers hard to be inside it, whispering, advising, presenting himself as the man who knows how Lagos thinks. Aliyu's invited as well, but not as the loudest advisor, as the one brought into difficult meetings when tempers are already hot. His reputation for cooling fires follows him. Sometimes that is appreciated. Sometimes it is resented. Then comes the first great dividing line. Who will be in the regional cabinet, the new group of ministers who will run education, finance, works, and local government under the premier? The competitor's ambition crystallizes. He wants education. It is the glamorous portfolio for a region that knows it is behind. Whoever holds it will be credited with dragging the North into the modern world, or blamed for failing. Aliyu is suggested for the same role. The argument inside the leadership is fierce, but it happens in low voices, behind doors that stay firmly shut. On one side, the case for the competitor, young, sharp, eager with friends in the emerging federal structures. On the other, Aliyu, older, steadier, with deep roots in traditional systems, and longer experience with bureaucratic machinery. What tips the scale is not a speech. It is a simple, brutal statistic delivered in a meeting that smells of sweat and frustration. A civil servant unfolds a paper and reads, "In some northern divisions, fewer than 1 in 20 children are in any form of school." Historians will later argue about the exact numbers, but the impact in that room is immediate. 1 in 20. The rest are walking the fields, carrying water, memorizing verses without ever seeing a science book. Ahmadu Bello looks around and says quietly, "This is not a ministry. This is a fire." He turns to Aliyu. "You understand the language of the palace," he says. "You understand the fears of our elders. If we need to open hundreds of schools, we must first open their minds. Can you do that without burning what they cherish?" Aliyu does not answer with promises. He answers with a condition. "Give me time," he says. "And do not panic when the South mocks us for going slower than they want." Our race is not theirs. Time. Again, that dangerous word. He is appointed Minister of Education for the northern region. Outside, the competitor smiles thinly and congratulates him. Inside, he recalculates. The race is not over. It has changed shape. He will seek another portfolio, another route, maybe through the Federal Center, where northern politics meets southern rivals and British expectations. In his mind, Aliyu has just accepted the heaviest load in the hottest season. A noble burden, perhaps, but also a trap if he fails. Aliyu steps into office knowing two things. The North is years behind the South in Western education, and independence is no longer a distant concept but a date on a British calendar. The British have made it clear. They will not stay forever. The countdown is now official. 5 years, maybe less. That is what he calculates. Sitting at his new desk, staring at maps and enrollment figures that look less like statistics and more like accusations. 5 years to build enough schools that the North does not show up at independence as the silent partner. 5 years to persuade emirs that sending their children to government schools is not a betrayal of heritage. 5 years to convince the British that the North is capable of self-governance without being rushed into chaos. 5 years, while rivals, Southern politicians, British officials, and his own competitor watch for any sign of weakness. The clock does not tick loudly. It throbs like a vein at the temple. As minister, Aliyu discovers a new battlefield. The inside of the file. Budgets, memos, proposals. Every decision creates enemies. Build a school here, and another district will ask why they were ignored. Hire a Southern teacher for a Northern school, and someone will accuse him of opening the door to outside influence. Push too hard on Western curriculum, and religious leaders will fear erosion. Move too slowly, and the newspapers in Lagos will print editorials about a backward North, dragging the country down. The competitor knows how to use those newspapers. From his new position, less central inside the region, but increasingly visible at the federal level, he cultivates journalists, Southern, allies, even a few British correspondents. He makes sure they hear about every delay in Northern school construction, every controversy over curricula, every whisper that Aliyu is too cautious. In private, he frames himself as the Northern politician who is willing to be bold, where Aliyu is careful. The twist comes from an unexpected direction. London. Nigeria is preparing for another constitutional conference there, a meeting where regional leaders and British officials will hammer out the next stage of self-government, the distribution of powers, the calendar toward full independence. The delegation lists become weapons. Who goes to London will not only shape the country's future, they will also become its symbols. The competitor angles for inclusion. He presents his federal experience, his relationships, his fluency in constitutional vocabulary. He lets it be known that Southern leaders trust him. For the British, that is tempting. Men who can bridge regions, make governance easier. Some within the Northern leadership suggest that Aliyu should stay home, focus on his schools. After all, education is enough to occupy any man's time. Let others fight over constitutional formulas in London. Let the Minister of Education be what he is. A builder of classrooms, not an architect of constitutions. Aliyu sees the danger. If he is absent from London, the shape of Nigeria may be drawn by men who do not feel the urgency of Northern lag. They will talk of elegant political balances, of federal structures, of timelines and milestones, while he is buried in the slow work of opening schools. When the new Nigeria is announced, he could be hailed as a good regional servant, and nothing more. One night in Kaduna, he sits with Ahmadu Bello long after most of the compound has gone quiet. The premier's tired. The day has been full of petitions, disputes, and visitors with urgent needs, but he listens. If I do not go to London, Aliyu says, some will be relieved. They will say I have enough to do. They will say my presence is not required. Say, he leans forward. But when they decide how many years the North will have to prepare, how much control regions will retain over education, how resources will be shared, who will remind them what it means for a boy in our villages to arrive at adulthood unable to read the laws that govern him? The premier studies him. And if you go, he asks, who will hold your ministry together while you sit in London arguing with lawyers? It is not a rhetorical question. It is a test. Aliyu answers with the hardest promise he has ever made. Give me a deputy I can trust, he says. We will plan every step before I leave. The work will not stop. If I fail you in both places, in Kaduna and in London, then take this portfolio from me. I will not complain. That is the time limit he sets on himself. Not 5 vague years. A clear challenge. Succeed or step aside. Ahmadu Bello agrees. In London, Aliyu walks streets whose stones were once wet with the rain of empire. Nigerian delegations move through committee rooms and corridors like actors in a play they did not write, reading lines half in their own voices, half in the voices of men who ruled them. Southern leaders, more familiar with the city, navigate with ease. British officials speak their polished English, a language Aliyu now commands but never fully trusts. Inside the main conference hall, when the North speaks, many ears tune in for one thing: fear. Will the North demand delay? More time before full independence? More guarantees? Aliyu listens to speech after speech, watching how the British lean forward at some moments and relax at others. He realizes a cruel truth. For them, Nigerian independence is not a moral victory. It is a logistical problem to be solved elegantly. A timetable, a neat exit. When his turn comes, he stands, feeling the weight of the North on his shoulders like an invisible cloak. The competitors in the room, too, part of the broader delegation, waiting to hear whether Aliyu will confirm the stereotype of the hesitant conservative northerner or surprise them. Aliyu begins softly in English that carries a faint Hausa cadence. In this room, he says, we talk about dates on paper, 1959, 1960. We talk about assemblies, majorities, responsibilities. But in my region, there are men who cannot yet sign their own names. He does not apologize for the North's lateness. He does not beg for indulgence. He names it, then turns it. You tell us that independence comes with a price. Readiness? We agree. But understand that for us, readiness does not mean perfect schools or perfect administrations. We will not wait for perfect. We cannot. It would take a generation. He pauses. Readiness, for us, means this: that when we sit with our brothers from the South in a federal parliament, we will be able to understand the laws we pass, and our people will be able to feel their impact. Then he does something that startles the room. He accepts the idea of an early independence date, not grudgingly, strategically. Set the date, he says. Make it soon enough that Nigerians alive today will see it. But hear us clearly. If you rush us without respecting the different starting points of our regions, you will create not one Nigeria again, but many. One confident, one afraid, one educated in your language, one forced to sign with a thumbprint and hope. He demands, not delay for delay's sake, but specific protections, regional control over key sectors, especially education, financial, arrangements that acknowledge existing disparities. Enough time to expand the North's capacity without making it permanent prey. The British delegation hears something they did not expect. A North that is not simply dragging its feet, but calculating its steps. The competitor hears something he did not expect either. Aliyu using the language of modern politics without abandoning the North's insecurities as bargaining tools. He realizes that his rival is no longer just a skilled administrator or a palace favorite. He is becoming something harder to dislodge, a symbol of northern caution that even modernists can respect. By the time the conference ends, the outline of Nigeria's path to independence is clearer. A date is in sight. The newspapers will later print the headlines and the photographs, smiling delegates, shaking hands, making history. But beneath those images lies a quieter victory for Aliyu. He has managed to be in both places at once, in the smoky backrooms of Kaduna, designing schools and budgets, and in the chilly halls of London, writing his region into the future constitution. He returns home not merely as Minister of Education, but as one of the visible faces of Northern leadership in the national story. In Bida, the old man who once warned him that powers survived would not recognize the world his former pupil now walks in. It is no longer just horses and palaces and whispers. It is microphones, communiques, and the relentless gaze of international observers. The competitor is not finished. He never will be. He will find new angles in the coming federal elections, new allies among those impatient with northern caution. The rivalry moves now from regional offices to national corridors, from dusty campaign trails to marble floors. But something fundamental has shifted. Aliyu Makama Bida has crossed the threshold from servant of systems to shaper of them. The boy from Bida, taught to read the silence of courtyards, now reads the silence of conference halls. He holds a ministerial portfolio that touches the most sensitive nerve of northern survival. He has stood in London and argued not for a delay of destiny, but for a design that lets his people stand without shaking. The countdown continues, toward independence, toward new storms no one in 1950s Nigeria can yet imagine. Coup, crise, foreign pressures. All of that waits in the dark future. For now, Aliyu stands in the narrow space between the end of empire and the beginning of a fragile country, with a title that finally matches the weight he has always felt on his shoulders, and with a single question pressing harder than any rival. Now that you have power, how quickly and how wisely can you use it before time runs out? They give him 5 years to close a gap it took half a century to create. 5 rainy seasons to turn a region where most boys cannot read a newspaper into a region ready to govern a country. And somewhere out there, a man who wants his job is counting those years, like a hunter counting bullets. The first morning he walks into the Ministry of Education as its master, not its supplicant. The building feels too small for the weight on his shoulders. Files are stacked on desks like termite mounds. Maps of the region line the walls, faded, inaccurate, cruelly honest. In some districts, there is not a single government secondary school. In others, one teacher is responsible for more than 100 children. He calls for fresh maps. Civil servants blink at him. Fresh maps? Yes, Aliyu says. If we are lost, I would at least like to know where. They bring out new paper, rulers, ink. For 3 days, his office becomes a cartographer's workshop. Every school is marked with a pin, every teacher training center, every mission school, every Quranic school that might be coaxed into cooperation. When they are done, the North lies before him, not as a legend, but as a wound. Whole areas almost empty of pins, like deserts of opportunity. He walks along the wall, hand hovering over the pins. Here, he says, tapping a district where only 2 tiny markers stand. How many children? Perhaps 60,000, sir. And 2 schools. He steps back. Then this is where the fire is hottest. Fire. That's how he thinks of it now. Not a ministry, a fire. He starts where resistance will be strongest, with the emirs. In shadowed palace courtyards, he sits cross-legged on mats. The same boy of Bida now returning as a minister with a briefcase and a ticking clock. Old men who once watched him run errands now call him honorable. They listen as he lays out the numbers. 1 child in 20 in Western school, 19 left to face a future written in a language they cannot read. Some elders argue that Quranic education is enough, that Western schools produce disrespectful sons who forget how to kneel. Aliyu does not dismiss them. He talks of balance, of integrating religious teaching with arithmetic and geography. He promises that learning English will not mean abandoning God, but he does not soften one truth. If you shut your gates to government schools, he tells them quietly, you're not protecting your people from the world. You're only ensuring that when the world arrives, it will speak to them through someone else. In some palaces, he leaves with cautious approval. In others, with only polite tea and tighter smiles. Each visit costs him days he cannot afford. The deadline, independence, in the first federal elections moves closer like a drumbeat. While he moves from palace to palace, the competitor moves from microphone to microphone. From his seat in the emerging federal politics, he embraces the cameras. He gives interviews in English for Lagos listeners and in Hausa for northern audiences. He speaks of bold reforms, of sweeping away half measures, of forcing the North to catch up with the South through aggressive expansion of schools, even if some elders object. He does not say Aliyu's name. He doesn't need to. When a Lagos newspaper publishes an article titled, "Is Northern Caution Holding Nigeria Back?" the competitor doesn't write it, but he makes sure it circulates in Kaduna. The implication is sharp. While Aliyu sips tea with emirs, the rest of the country races ahead. Yet on the ground, in places where newspapers never reach, the shape of change is concrete, simple, immediate. A mud-walled compound that used to be a grain store becomes a classroom, its walls freshly whitewashed, a blackboard nailed where millet once hung. A girl clutches a slate and chalk the way her mother once clutched firewood. A boy recites the alphabet aloud, tongue stumbling, while his grandfather watches from the shade, half proud, half afraid. In one village, when the first school opens, a woman walks around the building 3 times at dawn, praying on each side. Let the roof hold, she whispers. Let our children be better than us, not strangers to us. Aliyu hears of it in a report. The image stays with him. The roof is not just wood and corrugated iron. It is the thin cover between his plans and disaster. He pushes for teacher training colleges, knowing that buildings without teachers are empty promises. He offers scholarships, modest stipends, even cloth and grain to families willing to let sons and, in rare cases, daughters leave home to learn to teach. He writes long, meticulous letters to missionary schools and private Islamic scholars alike, inviting cooperation, offering recognition, and sometimes shielding them when overzealous officials demand control. Progress comes, but in numbers that look small against the map. Today, 10 new classrooms. This month, 300 more pupils. This year, a handful of first-generation Northerners sit for exams that once belonged mostly to the South. On his desk, the clock says, time is passing in seconds. In the legislature, time is counted in sessions. In the streets, people count it in harvests. Independence is no longer an idea. It has a date. Then, suddenly, the date moves closer. The British, under pressure from both Nigerian nationalists and their own fatigue, signal that the handover may come earlier than expected. Deadlines shift. Negotiations in London harden. Independence, once a horizon, becomes a door swinging open fast. It hits Aliyu like a dry season windstorm. His carefully paced 5-year plan is now squeezed into fewer years than his spreadsheets were built for. Budgets must be renegotiated, construction timetables compressed. Teacher training accelerated without turning into fraud. And this is when the competitor makes his boldest move yet. At the federal level, he secures a portfolio that touches revenue and development. He cannot directly control Northern education, but he can influence how much money flows to the regions, how projects are prioritized, and how the story of Northern progress is told in national forums. In speeches in Lagos, he praises our hard-working Minister of Education in the North, while in private memos, he questions the pace of school building, the cost of teacher training, the politically delicate deference to emirs that slows reform. He presents himself to Southerners and British officials as the Northern leader who understands the urgency of national progress, and, to impatient young Northerners, as the man who will not be held hostage by tradition. The rivalries of earlier years now operate across two levels, like a game played on stacked boards. In Kaduna, Aliyu fights for classrooms. In Lagos, the competitor fights for narrative. The real shock comes not from a speech or an editorial, but from a collapse. One evening, during the rainy season, a new school roof gives way in a small town. Tin sheets buckle, mud walls sag. Children scramble out, some cut by falling nails and wood. No one dies, but blood stains the floor where slates should have scratched only chalk. Photographs arrive on Aliyu's desk before the official report does. A boy's arm bandaged with a torn shirt. Parents gathered in front of the broken building, faces tight with anger and fear. A plank with crude writing on it. You promised this would be safe. Investigations show what he dreaded. A contractor cut corners, using cheaper materials, bribing a lower official to sign off. The structure could never have survived the first heavy rain. The competitor does not waste the moment. In the federal capital, he floats the story to journalists. Northern rush to build schools leads to shoddy work. He suggests that the Ministry of Education is overwhelmed, that without fresh thinking and tougher leadership, more such disasters await. For the first time, Aliyu's position feels not just difficult, but precarious. In a tense regional cabinet meeting, voices rise. One colleague suggests freezing all new construction until a full audit is completed. Another argues that delays will give Southern politicians more ammunition to claim the North is unfit to manage its own development. Aliyu listens, then does something that surprises even himself. He stands and takes responsibility. I signed the final authorizations, he says. The fault, whatever its path, ends on this desk. We will investigate. We will punish those who stole from our children's safety. But we will not stop building. If we stop now, fear will finish what the storm began. It is not a grand speech. It is a stubborn one. But in the corridor afterwards, a young civil servant approaches him, eyes bright. Sir, he says, I joined this ministry because I was tired of watching us always blame others. Thank you for not pretending this is someone else's problem. Word of his stance spreads quietly through the bureaucracy. A different kind of loyalty begins to form. Not the loyalty of palace patronage or party discipline, but of people who are willing to work late for a man who will stand in front of the fire with them when it burns too hot. Independence arrives in 1960 with parades, flags, and speeches that history books will quote forever. In Lagos, the green and white flag rises, the Union Jack falls, and across Nigeria people cheer, dance, pray. In the North, celebrations are quieter, more careful. Fireworks cannot erase the numbers on Aliyu's maps. On the night of independence, after the last speech and the last handshake, he sits alone in his office, jacket off, the sound of distant drums floating through an open window. By his latest count, the number of children in government schools in the North has multiplied several times since he took office. Teacher training colleges exist where, a few years ago, there were none. Scholarships have sent Northern students to Ibadan, to London, even to distant universities in Egypt and India. But still, in some districts, a child can walk an hour and not see a classroom. He should feel triumphant. Instead, he feels a strange mixture of pride and dread. We are independent, he murmurs to himself, but are we ready to be responsible for our own failures? His competitor does not allow the question to hang in the air for long. With independence, federal politics become rougher, louder, more exposed. Coalitions shift. Regional tensions sharpen. The North is accused of dominating the federal parliament. The South complains of being outvoted. Old colonial boundaries harden into political fault lines. In this atmosphere, every decision about Northern education becomes a national issue. When Aliyu pushes for more funds, Southern newspapers accuse the North of asking the rest of the country to pay for its tardiness. When he argues for regional control over curriculum, Federalists warn that Nigeria will become a patchwork of incompatible systems. Behind many of these arguments, he can see his competitors' fingerprints, phrases he has heard in private conversations, now appearing in public articles. Yet there are victories that even rivalry cannot stain. In Zaria, plans solidify for a new university that will bear the premier's name. Ahmadu Bello University. For the North, it is more than a campus. It is a declaration that they will not send all their brightest sons and daughters south forever. Aliyu is not the only architect of this project, but he is among those who argue hardest for its urgency, even when budgets groan. When the first cohort of students walks through its gates, their footsteps sound to him like a new grammar being written on northern soil. He visits the campus quietly without ceremony. In a lecture hall, he watches a young man in a white lab coat explain chemical reactions to a room full of attentive faces. The blackboard is crowded with formulas. Outside, the city of Zaria hums with its usual markets and calls to prayer. Inside, a different kind of call is being answered. A thought hits him with the force of a blow. In 10 or 15 years, some of these students will sit where he now sits. Some will govern better, some perhaps worse. But they will be products of a system he helped create. And what if the system collapses? The question feels melodramatic, until the country begins to shake. Political crises erupt in the western region. Accusations of rigged elections, protests, violence. The census becomes a battle over numbers that are supposed to be neutral, but carry the weight of power. In the north, there are whispers of plots, of soldiers grumbling in barracks, of foreign powers watching with interest. In this volatility, his competitor senses new possibilities. He shifts his rhetoric. Where once he attacked northern caution from the perspective of a modernizer, now he positions himself as a defender of northern interests against southern hostility. He warns that if men like Aliyu continue to rely on compromise and careful negotiation, the region will be outmaneuvered in the coming storms. Some younger politicians in the north listen. They were children when the first schools were built. They have grown up speaking both Hausa and English, reading both the Quran and the Constitution. They admire Aliyu's achievements but are impatient with his patience. One of them, once an eager scholarship recipient, now a legislator, confronts him in a corridor. "Honorable," the young man says, "with respect, your time was the time of emirs and British residents. Our time is the time of generals and mass rallies. You are building schools for a country that does not exist yet. We are fighting for a country that might disappear tomorrow." Aliyu studies him, seeing in the young man's face echoes of the boys he once sent to teacher training. The irony stings. He wanted thinkers. He got strategists. "You think the country is collapsing?" Aliyu answers. "Tell me then. If it does, what will you stand on, if not the minds of those who can read, write, argue, and remember?" The young man shrugs, a gesture somewhere between respect and dismissal. "If the guns speak," he says, "no one will ask for certificates." That line haunts Aliyu, guns. For all his life in politics, power has been something passed through councils, caucuses, palace consultations, colonial conferences. Now there is talk of men who might take it in a night with a few well-placed units and a handful of radio stations. He feels the old warning from Bida echo. Power is not inherited, it is survived. The deadline he once imagined as a date on a British document now takes on a darker form. How long can a civilian system, any civilian system, hold in a country vibrating with unresolved anger? He has one last major fight before the storm breaks. In the regional government, a proposal emerges to cut education spending temporarily, to fund urgent security measures and political stabilization projects. The argument is brutally practical. Textbooks can wait if the streets are burning. He understands the logic. He rejects the conclusion. In meeting after meeting, he insists that cutting into schools to feed the flames of crisis is like dismantling the roof to have more wood for the fire below. He presents data showing how many new teachers have just graduated, how many classrooms are finally ready to open their doors. To starve them now would waste not just money, but trust. Privately, some colleagues urge him to yield. "These are extraordinary times, Aliyu," one tells him. "We can restore the funds later. Right now, we must survive." He hears the word later and feels how often it has been used as a graveyard for promises. He takes his stand in the assembly, speaking with a controlled fury that shocks those who know him as a patient negotiator. "You want to pay for short-term peace with long-term darkness," he says. "You're ready to buy a month of quiet by stealing a decade of opportunity. I warn you, you will not like the receipt when it arrives." The vote is close. He wins, but by less than he had hoped. The competitor's allies mark down the result as evidence that Aliyu's hold is slipping. Another few incidents, another scandal or two, and he could be pushed aside for the good of the region. He feels the ground under his feet becoming less firm, even as the walls of his schools become more solid. Then, one night, shortly before dawn, the country's fragile balance finally snaps. Phones ring in Kaduna with news that sounds like rumor, but hardens into fact. There has been a coup. Soldiers have moved. Leaders in Lagos and in some regions have been arrested, some killed. Radio announcements, stilted, calm, terrifying, declare a new order, the end of corrupt civilian rule, the beginning of discipline. In the north, Shock turns quickly into a mix of fear and fury. Some of those killed are beloved. Some of those targeted are men Aliyu has argued with for years, but never wished dead. Streets fill with tense crowds, barracks hum with orders and counter-orders. He is woken by an urgent knock. "Sir," an aide says, pale, "they are saying there may be reprisals. They are saying the North will not accept this. They are saying the aide cannot finish." The words are too large. In that moment, Aliyu's carefully constructed deadlines, 5 years, 3 years, budget cycles, academic calendars, collapse into one brutal, immediate limit. How many hours does he have before events spiral beyond anyone's control? He does not go to the radio station to make a speech. He goes to his ministry. In the warren of rooms where, for years, teachers' postings and exam schedules have been arranged, people stand in corridors, whispering, "I'm listening for distant gunfire." He gathers senior staff in a conference room. There is no time for rhetoric. "We do not know what tomorrow's government will look like," he tells them. "We do not know who will sit in these chairs. Perhaps not us," he taps the table. "But children will still be in classrooms, or they won't. That is still in our hands, for a little while longer." He orders that exam records be duplicated and stored in multiple locations. In case offices are raided or burned, he instructs that scholarships already granted must proceed unless explicitly canceled by the new authorities. He asks for contingency plans for keeping schools open, even if political meetings are banned. As he speaks, he realizes he is behaving as if his own tenure might end within days. It may. The time limit he once set for himself, to succeed or step aside, has been overtaken by a different, harsher deadline. Survive the transition, with as much of the educational infrastructure intact as possible. In the confusion of the coup's aftermath, as alliances twist and newspapers are censored, one thing becomes clear. The age of gentlemen, in flowing robes, debating policy over tea while colonial officials took notes, is over. The age of uniforms has begun. His competitor, quicker to adapt, begins to appear in the company of new strongmen, offering advice, translating between military, bluntness, and political nuance. He smiles the smile of a man who believes he might ride this storm to a higher position than any parliament could have given him. Aliyu stands at a different crossroads. He has built enough to be remembered. He has not built enough to be satisfied. He holds a ministry that the new rulers may see as secondary, even expendable, besides security and national discipline. Time, always his enemy, has finally caught him in the open. The question that now presses on him is no longer, how fast can you build? It is harsher, more intimate. When power changes hands at the barrel of a gun, can anything you built with chalk, paper, and persuasion survive? The first time a soldier salutes him, he almost laughs. This boy in starched khaki, boots polished like mirrors, rifle on his shoulder, snaps his hand to his cap and calls him "sir" with a stiffness he never heard from colonial residents or party men. For a heartbeat, the contrast is absurd. The man who has spent his life fighting for chalk and desks is now being honored by someone who can order a firing squad. Then he notices the soldier's eyes. They are not respectful. They are measuring. In the days after the coup, the ministry lives in a kind of suspended dawn. Telephones ring with rumors. Files pile up on desks untouched. Radios hiss and crackle with statements from men whose names many civil servants have never heard before. Men who speak of discipline and cleaning up the mess of the politicians. Politicians. That word now includes him, whether he likes it or not. A new military governor summons the senior officials of the region. The meeting is in a familiar room made strange by uniforms. Where there once were agbadas and flowing robes, now there are epaulets and belts. Where there used to be jokes about party factions, there's a silence only broken by the clink of metals when someone shifts in their seat. Aliyu sits quietly, the only man in a simple babanriga among a row of pressed army greens. The governor speaks bluntly. "We will not shut the schools," he says. "The world is watching. We will show them we can govern better than those who failed." Aliyu feels the word "failed" land like a stone in his chest. At the edge of the room, leaning back as if the chairs belong to him, sits the competitor. Of course he's here. He has a talent for surviving transitions. He smiles, but it is the thin smile of someone calculating angles. When the governor finishes listing decrees and new chains of command, he turns to Aliyu. "Honorable Minister," he says, giving the title a faint, almost amused weight. "You will continue in your post. For now, education is important, but we have more urgent priorities. Security, unity, discipline. For now." The deadline he spent years fearing, a government reshuffle, a lost election, has been replaced by something cruder and sharper. A general's whim. Outside, the city murmurs with unease. Inside, in that airless room, a new kind of clock begins to tick. One whose hands are invisible, whose alarm could sound with a midnight knock. He walks back to his office with the competitor at his side. You see, the man says, tone light. In the end, they realize they need continuity. They need men like us. Aliyu stops in the corridor. Do they? He asks. Or do they merely need someone to blame when the next storm comes? The competitor chuckles. Blame is a small price to pay for staying close to power, my friend. The word friend has never sounded less friendly. In the months that follow, the ministry is both protected and suffocated. Budgets still arrive, but now stamped with military seals. Recommendations for scholarships must pass through security vetting. Some names disappear from lists between one draft and the next, quietly erased by invisible hands. When he protests, officers with polite voices tell him, "We cannot be careless. We must know who we are sending abroad, who we are training. We cannot educate our enemies." Enemies. There was a time when his main fight was against ignorance, a formless mass. Now the country is slicing itself into camps, and every classroom, every scholarship, is scrutinized through the lens of loyalty. He pushes back where he can. He insists that exams remain anonymous, that scores, not surnames, determine who gets the best places. He argues that a country that only educates those it already trusts will slowly learn to trust no one. Sometimes he wins. More often he compromises, shaving away pieces of his principles to save the core. Each concession feels like losing a brick from the foundation of a house he has spent decades building. Then comes the counter-coup, and the country's floor seems to drop. News arrives in whispers. Officers have turned on each other. Blood has been spilled. Leaders in the South and the North have died. This time, the justification is not just corruption, but revenge. Rumors of massacres race faster than any official communique. In the North, rage explodes. Crowds pour into streets. Ethnic hatred, long kept behind the polite curtains of political rhetoric, bursts out into the open. Houses are burned, bodies lie in gutters where children once played. One afternoon, as he is reviewing a list of new teacher postings, a clerk comes running, face ashen. "Sir, the new secondary school at the edge of town, the students from the South. People are saying they must be driven out. Some have already gone to the gates with sticks." Aliyu does not ask for permission. He drives there himself, heart-pounding. A small convoy of officials behind him. When they arrive, the scene is worse than he feared. A crowd of young men shouting, throwing stones, trying to force their way into the compound where terrified students huddle inside dormitories, their worldly possessions packed in small tin trunks. He steps out of the car, age and fear making his legs heavy. "Go back," someone shouts. "This is not for you, Aliyu." He does not retreat. Single-handedly, without a helmet, without a gun, he walks between the crowd and the gate, palms raised. "You will not enter this school," he says, voice low but steady. A stone flies. It misses his head by inches, smashing against the wall. Dust and fragments sprinkle his shoulder like an early grave. "Those students are children," he continues. "They came here to learn, not to fight your battles." "They are not our children," someone yells back. He feels something inside him snap. "If you touch them," he says, each word carved from fury, "you will prove that everything I have worked for is a lie, that this country deserves nothing but fire." Is that what you want to be? Proof that we cannot live together except with machetes? So the crowd wavers. It is not a triumphant moment. It is messy, tense. Some spit at the ground near his feet. Some curse him as a traitor to his people, but slowly, grudgingly, they back away. The gates stay closed. The students inside, many of them shaking, some secretly clutching their prayer beads, live to see another day. That night, he does not sleep. He sits on his veranda, listening to the quiet crackle of distant fires, imagining classrooms swallowed by flames. He realizes that his fight is no longer just against illiteracy. It is against hatred that has learned to read. The military needs men like him, for now, but they also need different faces in foreign capitals to reassure investors and diplomats that Nigeria is still a functioning state. The civil war looms and the world's eyes are on them. One morning he receives a formal letter, hand-delivered by an officer with an awkward smile. The head of state is pleased to appoint him to a diplomatic post abroad. On paper, it is an honor, a promotion, a chance to represent Nigeria overseas. In private, he understands the subtext. "We need to change the political climate here," the officer says, skirting the truth. "You have served the region well. Now serve the nation elsewhere. Fresh blood can handle the ministry." Fresh blood. He looks at the letter, at the elegant script spelling his name, at the seal that tells him this is not a request. He has always known he would not die behind that desk. He did not expect to leave it like this. In the final days before his departure, he moves like a man trying to hide treasures before raiders arrive. He signs permanent staffing regulations that protect teachers from arbitrary transfer. He finalizes scholarship endowments that cannot easily be canceled. He pushes through the legal framework that secures the autonomy of Ahmadu Bello University, making it harder for future rulers to bend it into a factory for ideology instead of thought. His staff notice the urgency. "Sir," a director says, half joking, You behave as if barbarians are at the gate. Aliyu smiles thinly. They are not at the gate, he replies. They are already inside. I am just trying to put things out of reach. The day he steps onto the plane, a few journalists snap photographs. The seasoned northern statesman leaving to represent Nigeria abroad. The headlines are polite. The real story is buried. One of the key architects of northern education is being moved off stage in the middle of a national nervous breakdown. In his new posting, far from the crowded streets of Kaduna, he walks under gray skies and watches people queue for buses in orderly lines. Children in foreign uniforms carry heavy satchels, arguing about homework, unaware that their country once built empires and lost them. From a chilly office, he reads cables about battles, sieges, accusations of genocide, relief flights. Letters from home mention draft, hunger, propaganda. Some of the young officers whose names appear in the reports once sat in classrooms he helped build. He cannot shake the image. Exercise books sliding off desks replaced by rifles. At a reception, a diplomat from another African country, wine in hand, asks him bluntly, "Tell me, Alhaji, was it worth it? All those schools, all those speeches, and still your country bleeds?" Aliyu considers his answer, eyes fixed on the window where rain traces cold streaks down glass. "Tell me," he counters, "if we had not built them, how much worse would it be? How many more men with guns and no words at all?" The diplomat shrugs, unconvinced. But Aliyu holds on to the thought like a rope in a flood. The civil war ends, the maps are redrawn, then declared unchanged. The radio announces no victor, no vanquished, but the graves do not listen. Nigeria limps on, a wounded giant. When he finally returns home, older, more tired, it is to a country under yet another military government. The streets are both familiar and altered. New concrete buildings stand beside the mud walls of his youth. Posters of smiling officers promise a new beginning over cracked plaster. He is no longer a minister, no longer an ambassador. He is something both smaller and larger, an elder. Young administrators, some of them former scholarship recipients, now sit in positions he once occupied. They invite him to chair committees, to offer advice, to bless ceremonies with his presence. At Ahmadu Bello University, where he had once leaned over architectural drawings, he now sits in an auditorium as hundreds of graduates. In gowns file past, their names called, their degrees conferred. A vice-chancellor takes the podium, voice ringing. "We would like to recognize a man whose efforts helped make this institution possible. Alhaji Aliyu Makama Bida." The applause is warm, sustained. He smiles, but there is a bittersweet taste to the moment. He had always imagined seeing this day as a sitting minister, full of plans for the next decade. Instead, he sits in the audience, a guest at a feast he helped prepare but will not eat. After the ceremony, a young woman in a crisp suit approaches him, hesitation in her step. "Sir," she says, "you don't know me. My father received a scholarship from your ministry years ago. He became a teacher. Because of him, I stand here today with a degree. Thank you." Her gratitude is specific, tangible. It hits him harder than any official commendation. Later, at a constitutional conference, he finds himself seated once again near the competitor. Time has not been kind to the man. His hair is thinner, his once smooth face etched with lines from battles, both political and personal. He has ridden the waves of coups and counter-coups, sometimes close to the center, sometimes cloaked in sudden disappearance. They exchange polite greetings. During a break, as delegates sip tea and argue in clusters, the competitor sighs. "Do you remember," he says, "when we thought the biggest question was how many schools the North could build before independence?" Aliyu nods. "I remember," he replies. "Sometimes I miss that simplicity." The competitor stares into his cup. "My own son is a lawyer now," he says. "First degree in Zaria, then in London. He argues with me in English about democracy, in Hausa about tradition." A wry smile. "He quotes your speeches at me more than mine." The twist is almost too neat. The man who once mocked his caution now depends on fruits from the very tree he criticized. Aliyu feels no triumph, only a quiet, aching irony. "Then perhaps," he says softly, "we did something right after all." Years roll on. Governments change like seasons, some green with hope, others dry and brittle with disappointment. New leaders declare war on indiscipline, return to civil rule, a new dawn. Old posters are painted over, new slogans appear. The country's currency is redesigned. Its anthem changes. Its capital eventually will move. But in towns across the north, a more patient revolution continues. Schools that began as three-room blocks now sprawl with additional wings. Teachers who once memorized lessons from tattered manuals now adapt curricula to local needs. Girls arrive in larger numbers, clinging to exercise books as if they are passports. In one village, he visits a school that replaced the grain store he had once imagined. The walls, once whitewashed with hope, now bear the scrawl of generations of students. Dates scratched into plaster mark exam years. A faded poster of the periodic table hangs beside a chart of Arabic letters. A boy at the front of the class stands to answer a question. His English is halting but confident. His name is Makama. The teacher, noticing his amusement, explains after class. They named him for you, Alhaji, he says, smiling. His father was among the first in this town to send a child to your schools. The real statue, he realizes, is not carved in bronze. It is walking, breathing, mispronouncing long words, but trying anyway. His health begins to fail in the late 1970s. Doctors talk of blood pressure, of a heart that has pumped too hard for too long. They prescribe pills and rest, but rest has never been his language. He sets himself one last deadline. I want to live, he tells a friend half-jokingly, until I see one of our northern teachers become National Minister of Education. Then I will know the circle is closing. He watches appointments like a gambler tracking scores. When eventually a man from the north, trained in one of the colleges he helped found, takes that portfolio in a civilian government, he feels a quiet satisfaction. He writes a short letter of congratulations, simple and firm. Remember, he pens in careful script, that every budget line is a child's future disguised as numbers. Do not be afraid of being called cautious. Be more afraid of leaving people behind. He does not know if the new minister ever reads it on a busy day. It does not matter. Writing it is his way of handing over a relay baton only he can see. In 1980, as the harmattan dust blows across Bida, whitening roofs and roughening throats, his body finally insists on rest he cannot argue away. On one of his last good days, he insists on being driven past the old school, where he once learned under colonial eyes. It has grown too, changed names, added buildings. A group of students in faded uniforms loiters by the gate, laughing, gesturing with the easy arrogance of youth. None of them recognize the man in the back of the car. He watches them, a small smile playing on his lips. There is a temptation in such moments to demand acknowledgement, to wish for statues, for streets named, for textbooks with your face printed between dates and treaties. He feels the temptation, then lets it go. Let them not know, he thinks. Let them argue about football and exams and girlfriends and God, unaware that once, not so long ago, most boys their age in their grandparents' world could not even sign their name. He dies on March 25, 1980. The newspapers print formal obituaries. They list his posts: Native Authority Officer, Regional Minister, Ambassador, Member of Councils and Committees. They mention his honors, the titles before and after his name, the letters that show he was recognized by both his own country and strangers. Some mention briefly his work in education. They do not print the image of him standing alone before a murderous crowd, shielding a school gate with his aging body. They do not show the maps in faded ink he once hung on his wall, the deserts of pins slowly filling over decades. They do not replay the quiet conversations in palace courtyards, the stubborn arguments in budget meetings, the desperate rush to sign regulations before a plane carried him away. History is economical with its details, but in the mornings after his burial, across the north, bells or improvised gongs still sound in schoolyards. Children still shuffle into classrooms, some barefoot, some in mismatched sandals, carrying notebooks, dreams, hunger. Their teachers write dates on blackboards. They talk of independence and coups, of constitutions and geography, of atoms and verbs. Some of them mispronounce names, fumble with chalk, improvise examples. But they are there. They exist. In a country where power has so often been guarded by men with guns and guarded gates, Aliyu Makama Bida chose to fight for power that could fit into a child's hand, a pencil, a book, a certificate. His competitors' speeches, once so sharp, now live mostly in yellowing newspapers, and the memories of men who attend reunions and argue about who was right. The generals who once measured him with cold eyes have their own complex legacies: barracks, decrees, sometimes statues, sometimes curses. Aliyu's legacy is harder to photograph. It is a girl in Kano reading a science textbook printed in English and Hausa, a boy in Sokoto calculating how many bags of grain his father should sell, a young woman from Zaria standing in a courtroom, defending a client using laws written by men who never imagined someone like her. None of them need to know his name for his victory to stand. When power changes hands at the barrel of a gun, monuments crack and slogans fade. But the quieter power he believed in, the one built with chalk, paper, persistence, and time, moves from mind to mind, immune to coups, indifferent to uniforms. That is the gamble he made with his life. And in the unremarkable miracle of a school day, repeated in 1,000 corners of the North long after he's gone, you can see his answer to the question that once kept him awake at night. Yes, some things you build with words do survive.